In this portfolio in Paintover, we're going to be looking at the work of Isabelle Wallace. Isabelle, I appreciate you submitting your work to be considered. And for any of the viewers, if you also want to have your work considered to be in a video like this, feel free to leave a comment below in the video with a link to your work online, and I will add it to the hat, as it were. So, looking at the work here, let's get into the concept art. What we want to do is start by looking at the full body of work, kind of identifying some of the strengths and weaknesses, and then see if there's any kind of top line notes for direction before we go into Photoshop and start looking at an individual piece and seeing about doing a draw over or paint over of that. So right off the bat, what I'm seeing is a lot of interest in doing characters. Now the character sheets here are nice in that we are exempling turnarounds of the characters, multiple angles. We've got costume variations over here, which are quite nice on a couple of these as well. You are doing some experimentation with expression sheets there. And coming down, we also have some other work, comic work, various, it looks like student studies and the like that you probably did in a class, more characters, and various other studies and scenes. There is some nice work in the characters in that you have a very focused direction as far as what obviously interests you. And the turnarounds are nice, but the things that I would see as being a little weaker, as kind of bringing the portfolio down a little bit, is some of the inclusion of the student work, or anything that kind of says student or hobbyist. And this goes for anyone that is putting together a portfolio and you're kind of moving from that student position to trying to get into a more professional position. There's a lot of kind of work that are like this, little doodles, right? Little half concepts, little studies that you did of something, little graphic design projects you might have done in school. Those don't really belong in a proper illustration or concept art portfolio. So I would say eventually drop those out and then just focus more on a particular topic like, character design. I'm going to assume that that's your main direction on this because that's what you kind of lead with, and there's several pages with that. Now, keep in mind that anyone that's building a portfolio, you also need to have a mindset shift from art that interests you, subjects that interest you, your own OC characters, your own world, to showing a client that you can provide what they need. You're a problem solver for them because they're going to come to you with their ideas and you're going to realize those. Now, aside from that, there are some foundational errors here. And ultimately, that's the thing that is going to keep higher tier clients away from you. And we have to address that first. And really, no matter how good the ideas are behind things, if there are foundational errors, then it's really going to undermine everything. What I'm talking about with those is if there's anatomy, proportion errors, perspective errors, if there's basic errors with the lighting, shading, or rendering, all those things are going to undermine it. So we have to make sure that we don't have any foundational errors with the subjects. And then from there, we can start talking more about design and kind of what the direction for the portfolio is. But that's always the minimum to reach. The other thing that I'm seeing here, and let's go ahead and jump into Photoshop and take a look at piece over here, is that it's a mixture between drawing and painting. That's fine for right now, but going forward, you probably want to figure out what specifically you want to do. Because we're in a middle ground where we're not really getting the advantages of nice, clean lines, but we're not really fully developing the realism side of it either. So it's unclear what we're going for. If you're not going for nice, clean lines, that's fine. Somebody that came to my mind was T.B. Choi. This is a really, really skilled artist. If nobody's familiar with her, you ought to go familiarize yourself with her work. These are some concepts that she did for Valorant, and this would be fairly standard for a lot of projects, is to just do nice, clean lines with flat tones on it. And also consider what the style is. This is something else I wanted to bring up. What kind of style are you aiming for, Isabelle? And anyone else? What are you aiming for? Have a target that you're trying to hit. Don't just draw out of your mind. Have a page that's like, I'm trying to reach something like that. Is it realism? Is it semi-realism? Is it stylized? Any one of these is good, but you have to figure out which one it is, and you have to be able to deliver it at a really high level. So TB is a great one to look at. I see the expression sheets that you have here. Those are great to work on. If you're going to do them, really, really put a lot of time into studying expressions. And I don't know what all materials TB has out there that you can learn from, but potentially see if she has any classes on learning how to do that sort of thing. If you're doing anything that's animated, these can be really great. But if you're just doing characters for like a general video game or books, that sort of stuff, a lot of times expression sheets or pages like this aren't really needed on there. So looking at this, one of the things that comes to my mind is research. And that might be an odd thing to stand out, but what I see here is that not enough time is being spent in that research phase. And if it's a shock to anyone, a lot of concept art and illustration time is spent doing research. Just learning different kinds of jackets and boots and historical differences from different time periods of clothing. And it's really going to look up a lot of reference images and picking out things that, fit the character well. I don't feel like enough time was spent in the research phase. I'll use an example here of the little thigh bag. Thigh bag is fine as a little additional thing to add on the character, but that looks like the idea of a thigh bag rather than what they actually look like. And we have to make sure that we set them up in a way that is believable. So here we have really thick straps on a bag that is quite small, wouldn't really need one that big. And you pretty much always need one of the straps to go around the waist because that bag wants to fall down naturally, and you've got to have something that's cinching it up around the waist. It might be that it has a strap that goes all the way around. It might be that it has a clip that hooks onto a belt or to a belt buckle or something like, thing here. Then this one basically just tightens up to keep it from flapping off of the leg. So that's the sort of thing that we want to push further. We get the concept of it, and then we push it so that it becomes more believable and more interesting. So I went and I pulled together some references, and I want to show you some of these references because this examples the sort of things that we want to go look up in order to do a character like this. So let's just drop away the other stuff and have a clearer page to work with here. Zoom in a little bit. Okay, first up, direction guide. Have some direction guides to know, again, what are you aiming at? These are from New Edge. These are student works from New Edge. That is a concept art school. And these are really good level. These are hireable commercial grade character concept pages. This one has a nice turnaround. There's a little stylization to some of the shapes and everything, but everything is really evenly lit, really nice page. I like the little call outs of the major items. Those are quite nice. This one is more realistic, but again, very grounded characters. I also think that that's something that's really nice about Isabelle's work is that most of these character pages are very grounded characters. That's a good place to start at. The worst place to start at is sci-fi characters. Won't go into that right now, but avoid that. Either historical or current would be the best option for a junior illustrator. Something like this is going to be a really good option. Keep in mind that stylized characters, like a lot of the stuff that TB is doing, I love the artwork. I love how these look. A lot of people do. But this sort of stuff is much more difficult to do at a high level than realistic stuff. And that might seem a little counterintuitive, but it takes understanding reality to a really deep level in order to learn how to cut the corners, simplify it, and stylize it without breaking it. So if you want to ever be able to do what somebody else does, go figure out what they studied. Study all those things, and you should be able to mimic a similar result that they did. Okay, down here, this is a page from TB Choi, again from Valorant, and this is very common. Again, some nice lines, really good shape, and just flat tones. That would be fairly common for a character design, especially for a character that would likely be 3D animated, right? Expressions would be needed on that. And then same thing here, realistic, semi-stylized, or stylized. Have an idea there. Other just direction pieces that capture elements of the essence of the character and say, okay, I feel like across the board, these have a feel of what you're going for this character. I don't know anything about your character here with Isabelle, but it's a bit of that retro adventurer kind of feel to it. Okay, boots are similar. I think that could be a good inspiration for a boot. Same sort of thing here. These boots haven't been fully developed, so maybe borrowing some of the same design there. They'll look to see what other things they're given to these characters to kind of flesh them out. I see on most of these that they're getting a scarf. That infuses a nice extra little bit of color, breaks up the shape around the neck some. That's something that could be added. Additional straps across the waist here. That's something that could be considered. Maybe not so much on this one because it has a built-in belt, but otherwise. Okay. And several of these have like headpieces and wraps and stuff like that. But those are always nice to have is just character type directions. Now for this one, we do want to start with the face, and we want to start with proportions. Those are really important. So checking the proportions, we can see, let me lower the opacity of this a little bit so we can make that out a little better. So here, this is 8 heads. Now 8 heads is a little more than normal proportions, like true human proportions, but it's pretty common for character design. But here we're actually getting most of the body is pretty consistent. This all looks pretty good, but the head is a little small compared to the overall size of the body. Top of the head really needs to be coming to about there, and the eyes need to be moving up a little bit. We're getting a lot of extra head on the top and not quite enough on the bottom, so we can make that kind of edit there. So really, I think proportion-wise is working quite well to just scale the head up a little bit. Face-wise, we want to push this in a more realistic direction, so we need some references, something like this. They all have a similar look as to the character that was drawn, but there's a few things that is not being accounted for, that as we move to realism, as we develop it more, that we want to pay attention to. The lower lid. Lower lid is fairly defined in all these ladies. Now, it's obviously not something we want to do to make her look like old, but the fact that it's not there at all, that feels a little off. The eyebrows are very high. And we can leave them high-ish, but they probably do need to come down a little bit. We also are kind of missing the plane under here. Right, we'll need that. And then just the rendering and handling the tones, like the white of the eyes are really, really white. So we want to address that. Other things that could be addressed as we're going through the character. The outside of these flaps are all fur. Now, that's a little problematic because the fur doesn't have anything to stick to. So it really does need to be fabric. Let's take a look at some costumes. Okay, costume refs here. These are sorts of things you need to pull up. If I was doing a character reference page, sheet like this, I have several times this, but I just try to put some on the page so you have an idea. Several references for the jacket, several references for the backpack, references for the bag, references for the boot. Probably need pant references unless you already like the one from this one or something. We also need hair references. Right? What is the hair? I feel like we have an idea of the hairstyle, but it hasn't really been developed. Is it long and it goes down in the back like this? Does it stick up like this? Now, this one has a big presence to it, but it doesn't create very great shapes. That's why I would actually lean away from using this one and look at these others. This actually is fairly close, but is like a more interesting silhouette of the same thing. We're having that divider there on that side of the head and the hair coming off and having this sort of split. It doesn't fill in all the way around like this one does, so it gives her a little more unique silhouette. Also, the hairpiece tied over the head there, that would be a way to break up that shape if you wanted to do that. That could also be considered. Okay, so these were all the different kind of references. We would get the character sketched, get the basic proportions of the body in, and then you'd go find all this stuff and look through your different options, figure out which pieces you like, start plugging them into the design. And ideally, you start doing that back at this stage, right? And you're going through a lot of variations of different kinds of hairstyles, different kinds of jackets, different kinds of pants, all along here. That's where I feel like this is where more time should be spent and a little less doing some of the other things. Okay. Now I'm going to start stepping into this and doing a little Paintover, and I will likely need to time lapse this because it might take a little while. So we'll go into doing that. Starting the Paintover, I have the portraits over here to the left. Now the face is the most critical part of the image to get correct, so I'm going to start there. Remember that to always have references for any of the critical areas on a concept or an illustration. Sure, you can make things up from imagination, but those ought to be really minor things. Things like a little rock here or there, or some buttons, minor stuff. A face is a really major area of the image, and you don't want to be doing any guesswork at it. So looking at these references, I'm not trying to copy any one of them, but I'm just looking at the general shapes, trying to implement a little more accurate anatomy, and bring in some smaller planes, like the plane under the eye, and adjusting the position of some of the features like the eyebrows, tilt of the mouth, and bringing in a few extra things like the lower lip on a lot of dark skin ethnicities is much brighter, much pinker than what the top lip is. So I'm just trying to bring out that difference there that you saw. With the hair, I'm trying to adjust it as little as possible. I don't think that the hair was that far off, but it was a bit too solid. So here I'm just bringing in a little more texture and just the silhouette of the wavy bands of hair here give it a lot more texture visually and help to convey what the hair is and what it consists of rather than just kind of the solid tone of color. Moving over to the costume, the jacket is close, but there's a few things that are kind of off with it. The main thing is that we had fur on the inside and the outside of the flap area there on the chest, and you just wouldn't have that because that fur has to be attached to something as a support. So I'm adding that there and looking for other things that bring in just a little more authenticity and a few little extra details that add some believability to it, such as the wrinkles on the upper arm, that the sleeve was pulled up, then we would have a lot more wrinkling going on, like you see in that reference next to it. And then adding in the little leather straps with the buttons on them at the collar and at the end of the sleeve. That's the sort of thing that you just don't really think to put on there, and that's why you have references. Nobody has a good enough memory to memorize all of the makes of all kinds of clothing and what little things you can add to add that little extra. Moving over to the pants, not needing to do too much on the pants. It was missing some folds because it was so dark. The folds are very difficult to see. So I'm just raising the value a little bit, adding some of those folds in, and then moving down to the boots. Again, high boots, that's fine as a concept, but we need to clarify exactly what the make of these boots are. I'm looking at the reference there on the far right. These are laced all the way up, and that's the sort of specificity you need to do with a character design. It isn't about giving a general concept, it's about being very specific with it. And then moving whatever it is from being general to being more specific. Same thing with these pockets right here. The pockets were a bit bulky, a bit thick for something that you would want on the front of your jacket. So I looked at the reference on the top left, just off the screen there now, and it had nice thin pockets with the leather strap on them on the front, and that was an excellent little reference. And that continues the design of the jacket with the leather straps with the buttons as a way to fix different areas. Moving over to the backpack. Again, the backpack was fine as a general size, placement, all of that, but we could expand it to have a few other different textures to it, show where that strap is affixing on the side of the backpack, adding a couple of extra buttons, maybe there is some fur going underneath the strap in order to create a kind of consistency of the fur being used throughout the character. Now, all in all, the concept of the character was solid to begin with. There wasn't anything inherently wrong with that. It just needed a little more research in order to flesh it out and show that it can be more specific and therefore useful to a potential client. Now, I appreciate you reaching here to the end of the video, and I hope that this has been helpful. But because you are here, that also means that you might be interested in some art training yourself. And we have the winter art classes launched over at Swatches Academy. That is swatchesacademy.com. 7 different classes this season on a whole range of difficulty levels, from those who are complete beginners to those who are semi-pro. So visit swatchesacademy.com if you're interested in classes with that. And don't forget to leave a link to your online work below, and I'll add that to the list of possible ones for future videos. Thanks for joining. Until you see you next time, keep drawing.